Hey, this is Connor with Biker's Edge. Today we're talking about the Rocky Mountain Altitude Powerplay. This is the first Rocky Mountain e-bike we've ever had on the channel, so I'm really excited to see how this thing stacks up. There are a lot of new things for me with this bike, namely the drive system, the DynaMe 4. I'm really curious to see how it stacks up against, the Shimano EP8 or the Yamaha that's on the Giant stuff. There's a lot to dive into, so stick around. I'm gonna gloss over most of the geometry and travel and all of that stuff. It's easy enough to go Google that. So 160 millimeters of rear travel with 170 millimeters up front. It's got slack, long, aggressive geo, definitely in that enduro category. It has the DynaMe 4 drive, which has 108 Newton meters of peak torque, which is just like bonkers. This has a big 700 plus watt hour battery made for long adventure rides. And one really cool thing is it has Ride 4, which is Rocky's adjustable geometry system. And one cool feature is with a shock mount and a different shock and a different fork, you could turn this thing into an Instinct. So it's pretty versatile. So now let's jump into the fun part, the ride.
All right, this is my second time doing this climb. Thank you, screwing up the GoPro. So, climbing, there's a lot to jump into here. Initial, very first impressions. This bike is I think it is the smoothest, most natural feeling power delivery of all the e-bikes. There is a ton of power on offer, but it feels the most like a normal mountain bike in terms of like the pedaling feel and going uphill. And because of the way it works, the power delivery is instantaneous. It comes on really, really fast. And on the other side of that, it turns off really, really fast. So that's honestly taken me quite a bit of adjusting to get used to. On the e-bike, I call it like the e-bike bump. And on most e-bikes, you're able to give it like a pedal or two as you're coming up to a trail obstacle or a ledge or a rock. Give it a pedal or two, and then let that motor kind of like carry you over, Almost like a little afterburn effect. It keeps going, pops you up and over the obstacle. On this bike, you can't really do that. You stop pedaling right at the crest of that, so you don't smack your pedals, and the power stops. So very different. I think there are trade-offs with how quick the power comes on and off. It does make it feel natural and a lot like a regular bike, but also you can't do the e-bike bump. So pros and cons, I think. So before I rode this bike, I was pretty sure it was gonna feel like a waterbed with wheels, and it surprisingly does not feel that way. It feels very planted and grounded. It's heavy, it's got a lot of travel, slack geo. It's stable, but there's quite a bit of like feedback and feel of the trail, not in a bad way. You can feel where the bike is, you can feel where the bumps are. The bumps aren't a problem, the bike handles them very well, but you can feel them, which is nice for being able to control the bike and actually be able to ride a trail and not just point the bike downhill and hold on for dear life. You've got some input on where the bike goes and what it does. So I like that a lot. Another thing I like quite a bit is for an e-bike, this has a super short chainstay. And while it's heavy and squishy, the chainstay being short like that kind of helps you get the bike off the ground. Let's see, super scared to hit this blind, but we're just gonna go for it. We did fine. There we go. So actually super surprised at how much response and control you have over a bike this big and burly. Pretty good combo. It's there to save your bacon when you need it with all that travel and all that slack geo, but it also lets you be the pilot or the captain instead of the bike just doing everything for you. We're gonna go scout out this little drop here. There we go. All right, so we're gonna head back to the garage now, really dive in, see who this bike is for, what it's good at, if it's the e-bike for you.
Okay, so ride impressions on the Altitude Powerplay. Uphill, the very first and most prominent thing is how quiet the bike is. I'm very used to the Shimano motor, the EP8, which has first of all, a rattle, and it's a little whiny. The Yamaha was quieter and it's still a little bit whiny. Compared to those two, this motor is extremely quiet. It doesn't have that high pitch e-bike whine that most of us are probably used to. The second and probably coolest thing about this bike is how natural that motor or drive system felt. Really good way to describe this is a dimmer switch of power delivery rather than an on-off switch. The bike seems really in tune with what kind of effort you're putting into it. If you're putting in a big effort, really pushing, the bike gives you a lot more in return. If you're just farting around and soft pedaling, the bike doesn't give you a ton. It's not like other bikes where you pedal just a little bit and poof, motor's on. This one you kind of have to work for it, but that does give it a very natural, normal mountain bike feel. The power comes on very, very quickly. There isn't really any lag at all that I could tell between pedaling and the power kicking in. With other bikes, you pedal and maybe there's a split second of a delay and then the power kicks on. This bike doesn't have that. On the flip side of that, the power turns off very quickly. And one thing I've gotten used to with e-bikes, I call it the e-bike bump. You know, you're coming up to a rock or a ledge, you give it a pedal stroke or two, and you kind of let that motor carry you up and over the obstacle. On the Rocky, that doesn't work, because the second you stop pedaling, the second you lose power. And now you're halfway up a ledge with a 50+ pound bike that's not giving you any juice. And that took me a little bit of time to adjust to. So I think there are pros and cons with both of them. The Rocky has a couple tunable rider settings. The factory is neutral or at 0. I ended up preferring bumping the power delivery, I guess, by 2, which is the max. It came on a little quicker and a little faster and more aggressively, which was a little bit more what I'm used to with the Shimano motor. So I ended up preferring that +2 mode, but you know, to each their own. One thing I loved about this bike is how much power there is. You know, 108 Newton meters of peak torque is a lot of power. Most of the other bikes are sitting around 80, 85. The Orbea Rise is down here at 60. So 108 is a lot. Honestly, I was expecting to be doing burnouts in the parking lot with that kind of power. But with how smooth and natural the motor is, it didn't feel like that at all. Where I did notice the extra power though is where you're going up something really steep. And you know, on another e-bike, I'd be getting ready to put in a big Herculean effort on my part to get up the rest of it because the motor just ran out of juice. This one, that never really happened. It just continued to help even when it got steep, really steep. This bike, I won't lie, is not really made for technical climbing. It's not the most agile or maneuverable bike. It's heavy, it's big, it's slack, it's long. But I will say climbing in general isn't bad, especially if you have kind of open climbs or you're climbing up a fire road to get to your favorite downhill. It does really, really well there because it has a lot of power. I did a lot of testing on southern Utah mesas, and if you're at all familiar, you'll know that those are tight, twisty, and windy. So it struggled a little bit there compared to like normal wide open northern Utah style trails. But overall, I'd say it's a really good climber with a very, very natural feeling motor. So if you want a bike that feels a lot like your regular mountain bike, except you're going like 3, 4, 5 times faster, this is going to be a good one for you. On the downhill, where this thing is really designed to shine, the bike is incredibly stable. Lots of travel, long geo, heavy bike. It is incredibly hard to knock this thing offline. In the steep, nasty terrain, it really shines. One thing that was surprising is I kind of assumed this bike would feel like a waterbed with wheels, and it didn't. It wasn't ultra plush. It was soft and squishy for sure. It has a coil and 160 millimeters of travel. It wasn't that pig stuck in the mud feeling bike. There was actually a lot of feedback from the trail. You could feel the bumps. It didn't affect the bike enough to like cause problems or bump you around or knock you offline, but you could feel the bumps. You could feel what you were riding. And for me, that's huge. When you're on an e-bike, they can be kind of big and cumbersome and bulky in the first place. But if you keep one lively in that suspension tune, it goes a long way in making the bike not feel so big and bulky and cumbersome. It really allows you to ride the bike or to control the bike rather than just hang on, close your eyes, and keep it pointed downhill and let the bike do all the work for you. One thing I like about it is because of the motor design and how it's integrated into the frame, the chainstays are normal bike chainstay length. They don't get longer like most other e-bikes. So this bike actually isn't all that hard to get off the ground or to manual or to unweight the front. Sure, it's heavy, sure there's a lot of travel to overcome, but the geometry of the bike doesn't really hinder you in bunny hopping, jumping, you know, being playful on the bike. Again, I did a lot of testing on southern Utah mesas where it's tight and twisty and it's not always sustained steep downhill. The bike wasn't as awesome there. There were some sections, I rode Flying Monkey, and there were some sections there that were incredible. The bike felt really, really good. I rode it up here in northern Utah, and there were other sections where it's fast, steep, straight, wide open, and the bike was incredible. So this bike really craves steep, fast terrain more than it does kind of picky, tight, narrow stuff. So how does this bike compare to others? I'm actually going to leave this section short because I'm currently working on a altitude versus repeater versus heckler showdown. So I don't want to spill all the beans, and I'm not quite ready to really dive in and compare them. But I will say that if I wanted the most fun bike, that if I wanted to goof around and hit every side hit and just have a blast on the trail, I'd take the heckler. If I wanted the most well-rounded, go anywhere, do everything bike, I'd take the repeater. And if I just wanted the burliest, most capable bike with probably the best motor, I'd take the altitude. So just to wrap this up, who is this bike for? I see it as a really good option for two types of people. One is the person looking for a self-shuttle downhill bike, one that you can pedal to the top. This thing is as burly as you would ever want a bike to be. It will go anywhere. It will ride any trail you have the courage to go ride. And it'll get you to the top pretty quickly. The other type of rider I think it's good for are people looking to do big missions. It has a lot of battery life. The battery lasts a very, very long time. I think if you want to go do big missions and you're going to get into some hairy, nasty terrain, you're going out and just riding ridge lines and things get steep and loose and sketchy, this is going to be a really good bike for you because it's going to get you there. You've got the battery life to do a whole day ride, but then you've got the bike to back you up on the nasty terrain. So the one line bike review on the Rocky Mountain Altitude, it's a beast of a bike, up and down. So thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time.